Previously on The Stephen Kingdom.
Chamberlain, Maine. A lovely, idyllic place to start a home and raise a family. But this is before Carrie White had her way with the town, burned it to the ground, before the deaths of 440 poor souls, 67 of whom were you and high school seniors just about to graduate. One day, Chamberlain will become, as the Lewiston Daily Sun puts it, a town that is waiting to die. Yet, this is a tragedy not yet embedded in the minds of millions of readers. This is a tragedy only smattered across the pages of a manuscript by one Stephen King. A manuscript he has only recently finished, but not yet submitted for publication. Remember when Stephen was submitting novel after novel to Bill Thompson over at Doubleday, only to be rejected again and again? Well, over at Doubleday, editor Bill Thompson certainly remembers. After all, he's positive he has a hit writer on his hands. He just needs to find that writer's right hit. And hey, it's been a hot minute since he's heard from Stephen. So he sends Stephen a country music calendar. Both men had a soft spot for, quote, really trashy country music. And attached is a note. Did you know that your birthday is the same as A.P. Carter's?
Born December 15, 1891, Alvin Pleasant Delaney Carter was an American musician, avid song collector,
Hey, Carter! I got turned around here!
and patriarch of the Carter family, a trio which became one of the most notable acts in country music history, and which played a vital role in pioneering the entire genre of country music.
What have you been doing lately? I don't want to see your name on a bestseller list for Simon & Schuster. Next thing he gets in the mail, a manuscript of Carrie, with a caveat from King. Tabby fished this out of the wastebasket. I don't think it's any good at all, but go ahead and give it a read. This is the part of the story where you're getting way ahead of me. Of course, you know the Titanic sinks. It's part of the history books. But hey, it's fun to know a little bit about how the Titanic sinks. Or not fun, but you know, it's interesting. It's, look, okay, the Titanic metaphor is not great. We're talking about a book here. It's fun to know a little bit about how Carrie became such a hit, right? Right. So, who knows where Bill Thompson's head is at when he gets the Carrie manuscript? My guess is, it's probably equal parts. Oh, hell yeah! I can't wait to read what Stephen King has cooked up next. This may actually be his breakout novel. And, oh no, what if this isn't the one? And I have to reject yet another one of his novels and never submit another thing to me again. When Bill read Carrie, he knew he had a winner on his hands. Except for the ending.
In the first draft, when the prom explodes, Carrie turns into a giant figure. Literally. She develops horns, lightning comes from her fingertips, and she blasts an airplane out of the sky. I felt strongly that he needed to get rid of that ending and turn it into something just as lethal, but not a comic book.
Horns and fingertip lightning, huh? Well, that's one way to go, Stephen. By this point, Bill and Stephen had fostered such a friendly, trusting relationship that Stephen incorporated Bill's notes into his rewrites, bringing the final quarter of the novel into line with the rather low-key development of what had gone before. So, no more horns, no more lightning. These rewrites resulted in the more grounded ending we have today. Well, yeah, grounded for a high school girl losing control of her telekinetic powers anyway. Now, keep in mind that they also reached this same stage with Getting It On. Rewrites galore, only to end in a very polished but unpublished novel. So Bill and Stephen proceeded with cautious optimism. Now it's time to submit Carrie to the higher-ups. And remember, they do not like Bill, formerly from Sales Thompson. So what Bill has to do first is he has to get 3 supporting readings from his fellow editors, all of whom have to love Carrie as much as he does. And then the real work begins, says Bill.
I worked like a dog to get published. You go to the business department and say, I want to give this guy $5,000 for this book. And it's going to be 240 pages and 5.5 by 8.25, and I know we can sell 20,000 copies. They say they can publish it at $4.95 if those numbers are true. Then you go to sales and say, I want you to advance 15,000 copies of this novel. Sales will say, are you kidding? For a first novel by an unknown author, we'll be lucky if we get 5,000 out there. You put all your pieces together, hope it adds up and works out.
Both men's hard work led to a luncheon in New York to discuss Carrie's publication. A luncheon that Stephen took the Greyhound to, thanks to $75 he borrowed from his wife's grandmother. The lunch was somewhat of a gaffapalooza. Unable to sleep on the bus, a groggy Stephen showed up with blisters on his feet thanks to his fancy new shoes, ordered 2 gin and tonics, got drunk, and chowed down on some sloppy fettuccine, which Stephen recalls as, quote, a dish bearded young men should avoid. Overall, though, the luncheon was a success. Stephen left with the promising odds of Carrie's publication at 60-40 in his favor. So now, all he had to do was return to Maine and wait.
We didn't have a phone, and I got a message over the intercom. I was in the teacher's room, and it was, Stephen King, please come to the office. You have an urgent call from your wife. And I knew going up that either a kid had broken his leg or I sold the book. And it was the book. The editor from Doubleday had sent a telegram. It said, congratulations, Carrie, officially a Doubleday book, advanced $2,500, the future lies ahead, love, Bill.
The future lies ahead. And indeed it did, but not quite yet. See, the first printing of the hardback, it was a modest 30,000 copies, and what readers found on bookstore shelves on April 5th, 1974, was a shoddily bound, thin hardback featuring a... Oh, it feels so good. It was featuring a mysterious-looking woman who was more fashion model than awkward outcast teenager.
My editor and I had our own concept for that. Our concept of the jacket was to have a Grandma Moses type...
Oh, God. That fettuccine was so fettuccine.
Grandma Moses type primitive painting of a New England village that would go around in a wrap to the back.
Ooh, fettuccine. Oh my God, why did I do that? But again, Stephen was an unknown quantity. And man, those Doubleday folks really had it in for Bill Sales Department Thompson, who, according to Stephen, quote, was a man with relatively little power at Doubleday, and it kept showing up in funny little ways. When I left Doubleday, they canned him. Doubleday, more like double dicks. And what did readers of this unknown author's first novel find on the back of this book that featured a mysterious model and not an age-appropriate telekinetic teenager? Not a synopsis. Oh, no.
Stephen King's story will stun your sensibilities, jangle your nerve endings, and make you wonder even more.
Jangled nerve endings. I got those one night at a Tijuana motel. And right out of the gate, King and his debut novel were inextricably linked with the world of horror. In its advanced reading copy, Doubleday included a letter that said, "We feel it may be the novel of the year, a headlong narrative with the drive and relentless power of The Exorcist with the high-voltage shock of Rosemary's Baby. More than that, it is part of a rare breed in today's fiction market, a good story. We think Carrie and Stephen King have a bright future, and we welcome this chance to share both of them with you." Aside from being incredibly prescient, this letter also gave up the game that Carrie was riding the coattails of a new boom in horror. The late 60s and early 70s saw the release of two juggernauts, The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, both of which were huge hits as novels and as films. So horror was on the rise again, and as a novel from a first-time author, Carrie certainly benefited from this resurgence in mature, classy, and scary horror. As if that weren't enough, Carrie's publication followed up an absolutely staggering 1-2 punch in horror history, December 26th, 1973, saw the release of The Exorcist, William Friedkin's adaptation of William Peter Blatty's hit novel that went on to become the highest-grossing horror film of all time, a record that would only be beaten over 40 years later by the 2017 adaptation of It, a novel by, yeah, you know who. And then, just 2 months before the publication of Carrie, in February 1974, a new novel unleashed a different kind of horror on readers everywhere. A horror not demonic, not supernatural, but a horror that is very much of our world. Underwater.
A cloud in the shape of a killer shark.
From the best-selling novel, JAWS.
Needless to say, the horror pump was primed and readers wanted scares more than ever, which is why Doubleday's press release for Carrie emphasized the novel's horror elements above all else, with the Library Journal deeming King's debut novel as the bloodiest book of the year. Menstrual blood, blood of childbirth and miscarriage, blood of a whole town dying, and finally, the lifeblood of the heroine draining away. Wow. All that blood, almost like it's a metaphor or something. The press release cannily left out that the Library Journal ultimately did not recommend the book, but at the end of the day, hey, reviews were on the positive side, with the New York Times Newgate Calendar praising Carrie as exceedingly well written, and deeming it a novel that was guaranteed to give you a chill. And yet, Carrie's initial run was rather lackluster compared to the likes of JAWS, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist. Numbers vary, but sales were somewhere between 13,000 and 18,000 copies. Certainly nothing close to the 30,000 copies that were printed. Part of Carrie's underperformance, ironically enough, was because of this bad boy JAWS, a fellow horror novel upon whose coattails Carrie was most certainly riding. You see, JAWS was also a Doubleday book, and there's only so much marketing money to go around. So Doubleday doubled down on JAWS and left Carrie somewhat adrift at sea. But hey, people were reading Carrie, just maybe not always having the kind of reaction Stephen wanted.
The first time that I ever actually saw that book in someone's hands that I didn't know was this lady in first class on this airplane, and I was drunk when I saw it. And she was sitting there and reading this book with my name across the front. And I thought, okay, I'm up and walking in this turbulent plane because I have to go to that room at the front of the plane. And when I come back, I'm going to ask her how she likes that book. And when she tells me she likes it, I'm going to sign it for her. I'm going to say, I wrote that book, and if I have to show her my driver's license to prove it, I will. So I went up to the little room, and I came back, and I said, how do you like that book? And she said, I think it's shitty.
You know what, lady? Nobody cares what you think anyway.
If things had ended there, we may not know Stephen King as the prolific powerhouse we do today. Hell, I certainly wouldn't be running all over Maine filming this thing. But two things happened that would forever tip Ka in King's favor. A revolution in the paperback industry and the movie adaptation. Or, as Shooter McGavin would say,
Call it the perfect storm.
if Doubleday had gotten 80 grand for the Carrie paperback auction, they would have been pleased as punch. But Bob Tanner, president of the New English Library, had other plans. Bob Tanner, no relation to Danny, sees enormous potential with Carrie and promptly sends it up the corporate ladder to New York, where Elaine Coster reads it, hops on the horn with Doubleday and says, "We want it." As all this is happening, Stephen is back in Maine on pins and needles. His $2,500 hardcover earnings already dwindling. Once again, Stephen's modest expectations were just slightly surpassed. From the paperback sales he got, let me check my math here. Wait, that can't be right. $400,000!
I got that news from my editor on a Sunday. My wife was up visiting her mother, and I was in the house. She'd taken the kids. I was there by myself, and my legs went out from under me. I was standing in the doorway. We did have a phone by then, at least. They advanced it, but we were living in a real dump of an apartment, and I just slid down the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and sat there and said, "You said 40,000, right?" And he said, "No, $400,000. And we had the conversation, and I just walked around the house, and finally I couldn't gather my thoughts, and I finally decided I had to buy my wife a present.
Time to celebrate the King family's emancipation from poverty. So Stephen goes out to buy Tabitha an extravagant surprise Mother's Day gift. Wow, okay. What do you get the woman who saved Carrie from the trash and thus played a huge role in garnering the Kings this staggering sum of money? What does Stephen get her? Cruise tickets to the Bahamas? No. Timeshare? No. Lambo with the suicide doors?
Lambo.
A hairdryer at a drugstore for 29 bucks. Hey, I mean, don't blame Stephen. Everything was closed on Sundays, but still, a hairdryer? Come on, Stephen. Ah, well, at least he got a little karma for his cheapness in the form of crippling fear of his own mortality. See, on the way home, he was struck with the intense idea that things were too good to be true. He just couldn't get it out of his head that the universe had to somehow level things out and that he'd be blindsided by a car mere blocks from his home. But no, Stephen made it home. And Tabby's hair, well, it's never been wet since. Carrie's journey from almost trash to literary behemoth has been quite the roller coaster ride, and believe it or not, we haven't even reached the zenith yet. But I want to pause here to talk about a subject that's present in pretty much every single one of Stephen King's works: death. Carrie certainly has plenty of it, not the least of which is the death of Carrie White herself. But aside from Carrie, there is another woman whose death is inextricably linked to the novel's long and winding journey: Stephen King's mother. Now, there's no shortage of enormously important women in Stephen's life, and while we've focused mainly on Tabitha so far, we will hear so much more about Nellie Ruth Pillsbury King in future episodes, most notably when we explore young Stephen's early years. But by the time he's working on Carrie, Nellie was getting warning signs from her body that would all too eerily mirror Carrie White's. See, Nellie hadn't flown in 20 years, but on the return flight from her sister's funeral in 71 or 72, Stephen can't remember which, she began to bleed profusely. Stephen recounts the beginning of his mother's end in On Writing.
Although long past her change of life by that point, she told herself it was simply one final menstrual period. Locked in the tiny bathroom of a bouncing TWA jet, she stanched the bleeding with tampons. Plug it up, as Sue Snell and her friends might have cried. Then returned to her seat.
Uterine cancer. The end came in February of 1974, just a few months shy of seeing her son's first novel in print. Stephen's brother Dave woke him up at 6:15 in the morning, and when Stephen, hungover from drinking too much the night before, groggily got to the master bedroom of his dying mother, he saw there, beside her bed, reflected over and over again in a cluster of glasses, was an early bound galley of Carrie. Aunt Ethelyn had read it to her aloud a month or so before she died.
Mom's eyes went from Dave to me, Dave to me, Dave to me. "My boys," she said, then lapsed into what might have been sleep or unconsciousness. Dave held one of her hands, and I held the other. We could hear the pause after each rasping breath she drew growing longer and longer. Finally, there were no more breaths, and it was all pause.
Stephen gave the eulogy at his mother's funeral. I think I did a pretty good job, considering how drunk I was. Nellie didn't get to see the heights her son would reach, but she did get to see something perhaps even more important. Says Stephen, she knew everything was going to be all right. Everything was going to be all right. For the ones we love, really, what else is there? We want to know that they're going to be all right. After the $400,000 paperback sale, Carrie was certainly doing all right. Or at least Stephen, Tabby, Naomi, and Joe were. But that gargantuan chunk of change was a vote of confidence, not a guarantee of paperbacks just flying off the shelves. No, the ace up Carrie's sleeve wasn't even from the world of publishing. If there's one thing that'll get folks to buy a book, it's the countdown to the release of the movie adaptation. Gotta read the book before the movie comes out! Yeah, that's great. And then you can be one of those Nimrods complaining after the fact about all the stuff the movie left out. Hey, Caleb, I know it's a real shame they left out Hermione's house elf unionizing subplot, but maybe calling the movie an abortion's a tad harsh.
Master has given Dobby a shock.
What? On December 5th, 1976, a month after the release of Brian De Palma's film adaptation starring Sissy Spacek as Carrie White, the movie tie-in paperback hit the shelves and launched Carrie onto the New York Times bestseller list, staying there for 14 weeks. The paperback sales totaled 4 million copies, and still counting. Not a bad investment, I'd say, for a $400,000 book, and a far cry from those middling hardback sales. Said Stephen of his own success, "I started out as a storyteller. Along the way, I became an economic force." Stephen makes no bones about the success of the movie being directly responsible for the book's stratospheric success. The movie made the book, and the book made me. Well, Stephen, the movie made the book, and the book made you, and you made me make this YouTube series, so I guess the lesson we're all getting from this is, books are fine, but movies are better?
All right, then. I'm just gonna go watch a movie.
Carrie's life began as just another short story, something Stephen could fire off at night while teaching during the day. Something that could maybe keep the lights on a little longer, keep food on the table, and keep those pesky creditors at bay. Certainly nobody could have known just how successful Carrie would become, least of all Stephen King himself. But there is a difference between knowing and believing. When readers crack open a copy of Carrie, the first thing they'll see is Stephen's dedication. This is for Tabby, who got me into it, and then bailed me out of it. I've often thought about Stephen's loss of his mother in relation to the recent loss of my own father. He was a stockbroker in a small Indiana town, and it took a lot of guts for him to split off from a big firm and go off on his own. Start from the ground up, find his own clients, make his own way. And so while his left brain profession was about as far away as you could possibly fathom from my foolhardy right brain inclinations to write and make movies, we both had a deep connection when it came to chasing our dreams, trying to make our own way, and following our own vision, even if that vision didn't always pan out. He was my biggest fan, even when I had nothing to show for it. And I was lucky enough for him to see me at least have some modicum of success. You know, he saw me graduate from the MFA film program at USC and all those pesky student loans that followed. And he saw my first feature. He saw it do pretty well at film festivals, make it into theaters, pop up on VOD. He did pass away just a few weeks before it got to Netflix. I think he really would have liked that. Would have popped right up on his queue next to all those Mark Wahlberg movies. And I think about Stephen King, and I think about his mother dying before the world would come to know her son as Stephen King, as one of our most iconic living writers. Her son, Stephen King. And I think about her reading Carrie, getting to read it before it's published, but knowing it will be, and knowing that it's going to make her son's life and the life of his family just a little bit easier after all those years of hardship, just a little more comfortable after all those years of her son's hard work, all those years and years he spent slumped over a typewriter, unleashing story after story after story. Maybe the surf was finally starting to break. Maybe it was finally at last going to pay off for her son. No matter how many best-selling novels and movie adaptations and awards and accolades and presidential medals and YouTube series devoted to his life and works, Stephen has never forgotten how it all began. Trying and failing, over and over and over again, and then succeeding only because he had that secret magic that is more important than all the money and all the success in all the world. Someone who believed in him. Tabby.
Her support was a constant. One of the few good things I could take as a given. And whenever I see a first novel dedicated to a wife or a husband, I smile and think, there's someone who knows. Writing is a lonely job. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of difference. They don't have to make speeches. Just believing is usually enough.
Believing is enough. Giving. It's a nice thing to do. You give to things you like to support, things you believe in. And if you've made it this far, maybe you like what you've seen here at the Stephen Kingdom enough to show us a little fiscal love. I'm talking about Patreon. It's how we keep the show going. Filming at universities and cemeteries, and this here church ain't cheap, especially when we've got a crew to feed. Geez, another one? Okay. Our Patreon is a veritable treasure trove of extra content exclusive to our supporters. Look, guys, you don't even pay any taxes. Over on our Stephen Kingdom Patreon, you can find all sorts of things like early access to episodes, your name in the end credits, deleted scenes. Oh, no, wait, that was my bus fare. Just click the link in the video description and you'll be on your way. Guys, can I have my money back? I really do need to get home. Please?